Hello, good evening and welcome. I'm Karima Brown and you're watching Political Exchange, where we unpack Africa's political economy. South Africa's mining sector has been dominating the news as wildcat strikes continue. The labour unrest, characterised by violence, also come amid ongoing policy questions about just how South Africa is going to deal with the current Mineral Resources Act and where the changes are in the offing. More so because the African National Congress is holding its elective conference in December, where final decisions on policy will be taken. Joining us now to take a look at South Africa's mineral policy trajectory is the ANC's deputy head of its Economic Transformation Committee, Enoch Godongwana, as well as political economist Claude Bassiak from Unomics. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Mr. Godongwana, let me start with you. I want to situate the policy debate within the current crisis that we're experiencing within the mining sector. I understand that the African National Congress had a very high-powered meeting with the Chamber of Mines recently last week. Tell us what was agreed to in that meeting.
Unfortunately, it's one of those meetings that I missed. I was supposed to be part of that delegation, but the key issue, we've got two kinds of interaction with the mining industry. There's the broader policy issues which leading to the national conference. There's an immediate discussion around issues such as the strikes, the Marikana issues, and the meeting on Thursday focused around those issues. Mm-hmm. It was largely a briefing by the mining industry to the leadership of the ANC, mm-hmm. led by the Secretary General.
Mm-hmm. But from what I understand, there has been concern about the fact that our current bargaining structures are simply not yielding the kind of labour stability that one would have hoped. A lot of the deals that are being struck between individual companies, particularly in the platinum sector, and workers, is happening outside of those structures. Is the African National Congress concerned that the current bargaining relationship is under threat?
Let me just say the current bargaining structure and the institutions we've created, on their own, to us, they seem to be superb. But what we're witnessing in the, I think, in the labor movement is a beginning, is a process of stability within the union movement itself, which therefore impacts on the bargaining structures. Mm-hmm. So that, to me, is the main crisis. The platinum industry, in particular, has not been part of the centralized bargaining machinery in the mining sector. The discussion they're having is whether they should not be looking at that option for the platinum industry as well.
Mm-hmm. Claude, I know that you have expressed concern about the current state of affairs and that it's not, doesn't bode well for investors. What is your take? Are you as upbeat as Mr. Godongwana that the current bargaining structures are in fact sufficient?
Well, I think what we are seeing is the proof that these structures are experiencing fundamental stresses. The question is, what is stressing those structures? Now, it is very hopeful to see that the platinum industry, through the Chamber of Mine, is engaging with the labor unions. But also, there is a bit of a narrow view on that at this point, I think. We have opened to AMCU, and that's a good progress. But the reality is that most of the strikes we're seeing are even escaping the control and the leadership of AMCU. So are we going to be able to find some sort of stabilized agreement, stabilized framework, which allows for all these unexpressed or violently expressed, or in any case expressed outside of the current frameworks, demands, frustrations to be accommodated? That is the big question. We have to start with a formal process as it is going on now. But I think we have to be somewhat cautious about its ability to bring back stability and order and acceptability, broader acceptability mm-hmm. by the labor force. I think that's the key question. And in that sense, the reason why analysts are somewhat pessimist is that it seems that what is being expressed by the workers is something more fundamental than simply an issue with worker representativity.
What would that fundamental issue be, Claude, to your view?
Well, for our standpoint, there is really a sense that the political economic framework which has been established or was established after the end of apartheid in South Africa is experiencing fundamental stress. And that the kind of expectations of the population that were going to be not only politically but economically liberated has not really manifested. And what we've seen is a tremendous amount of inequalities in societies, increasing inequalities in societies, no longer along racial lines, but really along social class lines. And that needs to be addressed in one way or another. Mm-hmm. And the key risk, the key risk is that we are not managing to create enough growth and enough employment for any dispensation whatsoever to be stable in the long run.
Mr. Godongwana, do you share this view that, the ANC has acknowledged that inequality, unemployment, poverty are the triple challenges facing South Africa. There's no disagreement about that. The disagreement comes in how best to deal with those issues. Some economists are arguing that your policies are not yielding the kind of results, that there's constraints, the rigidities in our economy is not being addressed. Your protection of your labor allies in COSATU is one of the reasons why the market remains, inflexible. We've got labor amendments in front of the Parliament at the moment. Are we likely to see a change in the labor law regime that will allow the economy to deal with things like atypical work and so on?
Look, let me come back to this issue of the institutions being under stress, which I would agree. Does that mean of their own are these institutions not capable? The answer to that question, in my view, those institutions are well equipped to deal with any challenge in relation to bargaining. The problem we have are the issues of poverty, unemployment, which, whether you look into the bargaining structures, or whether you look into the communities, or what people have called a service delivery protest, are a manifestation of a bigger problem, not on the institutions. That the problem of poverty and unemployment is a challenge which needs urgent attention than any. Now, if you look at the current labor legislation, I take pride in the sense that I'm one of the people who crafted the legislation. I was one of the six from the labor union. The legislation is flexible enough that if you, let me just say to you, if you wanted to say in the metal industry, an entry rate should be A. There's nothing that prevents you in talking to the industry, if once in industry and labor unions are agreed to arrive at that entry rate. So it's not the legislation, it's the forces at play which may impact on achieving that objective. So we must distinguish between the legislation, which in my view fairly flexibly can give the flexibility, provided the parties can agree on that flexibility. The question is difficult to craft a consensus on that flexibility.
When we come to the issue of leadership, there has been a suggestion that the current political and trade union leadership is out of touch with what ordinary people are wanting. Workers are saying that when people become shop stewards, they literally become, distant from the membership. There's not enough servicing. COSATU's acknowledged that with their Back to Basics campaign. The ANC itself also acknowledges this growing social distance between its core supporters and itself as a party. Are you not worried, Mr. Godongwana, that you have lost touch as a party with South Africans?
Look, the question may be yes and no. Let me try and unpack to you. One of the manifestations from my own personal experience of this kind of problem is what we experienced when I was in the metal union in Mercedes-Benz in 1990. A similar situation arose, and what became clear is that we had too much full-time software that were distinct from the membership. So as organizations grow and become complacent, the possibility of getting a distance between the membership and leadership exists, and that is across the board. It may exist within the ANC as well. But is the ANC structured in such a manner that such a distance should occur? No.
And yet it is happening.
No, that's the problem. The ANC, if our structures were functioning properly, the ANC has got every branch in every community in every ward across the country. The question, are those structures functioning effectively and interacting with our communities effectively? That's the challenge we're dealing with as we go to an example. If we look at service delivery process, in all those areas you've got councillors, and in some councils you can find that the councillors, our local councillors, elected councillors, are not interacting with the community effectively. That in itself is a challenge we begin to address.
Claude, let's bring the risk issue in here. You've been speaking about this growing distance, that the kind of major parties who are party to the social compact are in fact out of touch with their bases, and what we're seeing is things falling through the cracks.
Indeed.
From where you're sitting as a political economist, how risky is South Africa as an investment destination at the moment? Without being alarmist, what are you guys looking at?
Yeah, well, I think we have to make the difference between investors who are looking for short-term returns, and I think from that sense there is no real sign that there's been some sort of a flight to safety from South Africa, particularly on the bond side and equity sides. We're doing fine. Not so in the mining sector because obviously of the structural crisis that is happening there at that point. But in terms of the longer term, I think there is concern because what we are seeing is not only tremendous social instability and therefore possibly political instability if that social instability continues, but also we are not seeing the kind of policies that are going to create the kind of growth that South Africa needs to be able to sustain the requirement and need of its population. There is a need for higher, faster, more inclusive growth. Everybody recognizes that, certainly on the side of the ANC. But the question is the growth model chosen by government at this point the one that can deliver that kind of growth?
Let me put you on the spot, Claude.
Yeah.
In your opinion, the growth model that we have at the moment, is it doing what it's supposed to do?
I really feel that South Africa cannot be everything to every man. It's a middle-income country that has tremendous internal social and political challenges in terms of including a population that was excluded politically and economically. It has at the same time tremendous amount of advantages in terms of its infrastructure, its skill base, its capital base, its financial sector, and so on and so forth. But the reality is that it cannot be at once a welfare state and a developmental state. The fiscal requirement, the capacity requirement, in terms of what it would be required for the state, the complexities in terms of including all those policies in a coherent format, delivering on time, is just not there. And in a sense, I think that South Africa is shortening itself from that standpoint. And I understand that there are political reasons why the model is the model that's been chosen. But it's difficult to see how that kind of dual state, welfare and developmental, is going to be able to be sustainable fiscally. And we see that there are questions being raised, on that point by the analyst communities and obviously by the rating community. Sorry.
I wanted to bring Mr. Gorongwana in here. Essentially, what Claude is saying is you have an identity crisis as the ANC. And of course, the ANC prides itself on being a multi-class organization, bringing all these forces together. And that the key is to be able to manage those contradictions so that we can move forward. And I'm sure your first answer to his question is going to be we have to get the balance right. But isn't it time for the ANC to make a decision? You can't have the kind of amounts of people, millions that we have on social grants, and then also talk about being competitive on the other hand. Or do you think that you're being asked to compare apples with peaches here?
There's no panacea in dealing with this problem. Coming here, I was reading the Real Economy book published by the Martin Creamer and them. A key thing they are raising is that because, and everybody has said it, because of sound macroeconomic management, we've been able to sustain avoid the kind of financial crisis, and our banks have been okay. But if you read the consultative document, on one hand, it says precisely because of what you guys are saying, sound macroeconomic management, that we've got so high unemployment. So what we need to do as South Africans is to, probably most of us have been oppositional for years. We are used to oppositional politics than to creating a framework of consensus. What is it that, the people have asked me, we've said in our policy conference, we need a macroeconomic review. What does that mean? It means that what works, we've got to keep. What does not work, we've got to review. Coming to this thing of the dual problem of social welfare and development, on the one hand, it's a choice. It's a choice we've taken that the route we have got to go is to make sure that we can put everyone into employment. But you've got to provide a social network, a safety network.
If I may, I mean, I think we all very sympathetic with the objectives of the ANC. I think there is no doubt about that. They are entirely legitimate from their intention. The key concern, that I think we all have is that to achieve that inclusive growth, you've gone to a path of high wages and state-centric or state-pushed industrialization. And that in itself contains the seed of the exclusion
on this
of a
issue
massive
of high
amount.
wages, comparatively to who?
Comparative to our competitors.
Gentlemen, we've got to take a short break. We will return to these very questions that you've just raised now. We have to take a short break, but when we return, we will continue our conversation with Mr. Enoch Godongwana and Claude Bastiak.